Okay, so this is the end of chapter 13. We're going to finish up this chapter with Asian empires, section 4. And so hopefully you've gotten a lot out of the political transformations and how these different empires developed, their interactions with the natives, and hopefully you see a lot of the different changes. And that's, remember what I told you when we first started part 4, is that's what this unit focuses on, as opposed to a continuation of those traditional values. This unit is about highlighting the changes that came within this 300-year time period, 1450 to 1750. And now we're going to look at the Asian empires. Okay. The Asian empires were regional as opposed to global. The creation of those Asian empires did not include massive epidemics like the Russians had on the native populations in Siberia and like the Europeans had on the native populations of the Americas. And they did not fundamentally transform their homelands like interaction with the Americas and Siberia did for the European powers. Remember, we talked about in section 3, the Russians, they were developing while they were conquering. And although the Europeans had well-established empires, their expansion and their exploration ultimately fundamentally transformed their homelands. Entire new economic systems and labor systems developed because of what they had discovered. But the Asian empires were different. They didn't transform with their interaction of, with the peoples within their empires. Now, let's start with making China an empire. The Qing dynasty, which was 1644 to 1912, notice, right, 20th century, launched enormous imperial expansion to the north and to the west. The Qing dynasty was a foreign Manchu regime headed by conquerors from the north, and while they were resented by many ethnic Chinese, they did not try to use Confucianism to justify their rule, like others had done. So for security purposes, they engaged in an 8-decade campaign in Tibet, Xinjiang, and Mongolia. The nomads of the north and the west were familiar to the Chinese. Of course, millennia of interaction there. And so they were, as opposed to the motivation of the Europeans for economic and rivalry and the rise of the merchant class, and as opposed to different times for the Russians, the Chinese were really motivated by security fears. They had to secure their borders. And initially that's what the Russians were doing, right, because of their interaction with these nomads to the south. But eventually it was about economics. It was about the money, right? And so for the Chinese, even as they evolved into a Central Asian empire because of what they had conquered, and initially being a Far Eastern empire, was this really colonial expansion? In many ways it was comparable to European overseas colonial rule, as an ethnically distinct group conquered another group at a great distance. However, the empire was built for security purposes, not economic goals or settlement. So indeed, few ethnic Chinese ventured into the Wild West, as they put it, and these regions maintained their traditional culture and lifestyles. And as they evolved into a Central Asian empire, this led to an economic downturn for the Central Asians. As the Qing expanded west and Russia expanded east, Central Asia, once home to the nomadic pastoralists and the cosmopolitan merchant cities on the Silk Roads, they soon found themselves to be a neglected backwater establishment on the periphery of these two great land empires. And the rise in maritime trade only made matters worse with the Europeans in their age of exploration. So, in the conquered territory was ruled separately from China through what the Chinese referred to as the Court of Colonial Affairs. And they used, most of the time, they most often used the local elites to govern these new territories. And a lot of times the officials imitated Chinese ways. And the government didn't try to assimilate conquered peoples. And you'd see that with allowing the local elites to govern. And there was, like I said, very little Chinese settlement into these conquered regions. So their motivation was not for settlement or economic reasons, but for security purposes. And here we have a map that shows you the expansion of the Chinese. Of course, you can see right there in the darker purple where they initially had land during this time period. And we see the expansion right to the east. And remember, the Russians are expanding east. The Chinese to the west. So here, with your Central Asians, we see the economic downturn and the problems that caused. These are the three that I'd mentioned, right? Tibet, Xinjiang, I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, and Mongolia. And now, China is essentially this large now, and before it was a lot smaller. And you can see, this actually shows you borders of countries now, right here. So you get a good idea of the modern shape that the Chinese Empire is taking on. Okay, Muslims and Hindus in the Mughal Empire. The Mughals actually united much of India between 1526 and 1707, and their empire's most important divide was the religious division between the Muslims and the Hindus. About 20% of the population was Muslim. The ruling dynasty and about 20% were Muslim. So even though just 20% of the population was Muslim, this included the ruling dynasty. So most of the population followed a form of Hinduism. Well, along comes an emperor named Akbar. And he ruled from 1556 to 1605. And he attempted some serious accommodation of the Hindu majority. He wanted people on his side because of that difference. He's Muslim and the ruling family's Muslim and most of the court members are Muslim. And it's a Muslim empire. However, 8 out of 10 people are Hindus. And so this is really, hopefully you're a little bit more familiar, even though you might not know about the division between the Muslims and the Hindus and how long this has lasted. Because it's well into the 20th century. But you could see it goes back a long time. But so Emperor Akbar really tries to accommodate the Hindu majority and make some serious changes. He brought many Hindus into the political military elite, giving them special positions. He even imposed a policy of toleration, religious toleration, and that was huge. He abolished the payment of the jizya by non-Muslims. Remember, that's the tax the non-Muslims initially were forced to pay if they didn't convert. He also created a state cult that stressed loyalty to the emperor. So even though he's making these changes, he also created this state cult that stressed loyalty to the emperor as opposed to the loyalty to the empire. And he and his successors encouraged a hybrid Indian, Persian, Turkic culture where most people could feel comfortable and feel welcome and were accepted. Emperor Akbar recognized the diversity of his realm and made, like I said, many accommodations for those Hindus. He did disapprove of sati, which is the widow burning, and other religious restrictions on women. His rule was a time of great tolerance, and that's very important. So, like I said, the removal of that jizya tax. He sponsored the house of worship, kind of like the one that was in Baghdad, but with the house of wisdom. But this is a house of worship where issues of faith could be debated amongst scholars of all religions, really. And he sponsored a culture that fused a variety of traditions, the Hindu, Persian, and Turkic. So that Mughal toleration provoked a reaction among some Muslims. It didn't go over well with many of them. 50 years later or so, Emperor Aurangzeb reversed this Mughal policy, and he tried to impose Islamic supremacy. And that didn't go over well either. Aurangzeb did ban sati, widow burning, music and dance at court, and other various vices that he believed were detrimental to society. He even went so far as to destroy some Hindu temples, and he reimposed the jizya tax. And of course, Aurangzeb's policies then provoked a Hindu reaction. So, as he became emperor and overturned many of Akbar's tolerant policies, reimposing the jizya and destroying the temples and banning the dancing girls and music at court, his reign marked a downturn in Hindu-Muslim relations and provoked bitter reactions from many of those Hindus. And thus we see a real severe division between Muslims and Hindus in India. Okay, here is the map that gives you guys a good idea of where we're talking about here. Remember, right along, well, maybe not that far down. Probably a little bit further up here are the Himalayas, and then up further north would be Tibet, and over here's China and so forth. Give you guys an idea. And eventually this over here becomes what's now Pakistan, and you can see the rest of Southwest Asia over here. Alright. Muslims and Christians now in the Ottoman Empire. So we just looked at Muslims and Hindus in the Mughal Empire in India. Now let's look at Muslims and Christians in the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire was the Islamic world's most important empire during the early modern period. They transformed Turkish social life. Many of those Turkish women lost freedoms and lost social status. And there was a long conflict between the Sunni Ottomans and the Shia Safavids. Remember the Shia Safavids? Those are that's the Persian Empire. One ruler really imposed Shia Islam, and a large number of the population are Shia Muslims in the Persian Empire, and thus we see the conflict between the Sunni Ottomans and the Shia Safavids. And it says this conflict lasted 1534 to 1639. And that's true. However, there are still many issues and conflicts between the Sunnis and the Shias today. So, you can see this has been going on for a long time as well. Okay. The Ottoman Empire was the site of a significant cross-cultural encounter between those in Southwest Asia, in Central Asia, and Muslims, and Southeastern Europe, Southern Europe, and Christians. In Anatolia, most of the conquered Christians eventually converted to Islam. In the Balkans, the Christian subjects mostly remained Christian. To give you an idea, Anatolia is where, it's Asia Minor, that's where Turkey is now. Anatolia is an Anatolian peninsula. The Balkans would be like some of the Eastern, Southeastern European countries like Romania, Bulgaria, and so forth. And so, those in Anatolia and Turkey, they eventually converted to Islam, but the ones in the Balkans remained Christian. And in the Balkans, many of the Christians actually welcomed Ottoman conquest. The Ottomans taxed less, and they were less oppressive. And it's so different now, but this is what it used to be like. Which you guys are seeing is the problem with extremists and fundamentalists. The Christian churches received considerable autonomy. They're allowed to continue on as they had before. They just had to pay a tax. The Ottomans, they were fine with it. And during this time, many Muslims or Muslim leaders, they consulted and hired Christian and Jewish architects and scholars and mathematicians and doctors to take care of a lot of things. So they valued and completely understood Judaism and Christianity, well, because Muhammad had been influenced by both of those religions. The Balkan elites they were accepted among the Ottoman elite without conversion. You're elite, I'm elite, doesn't matter the religion. So it's very interesting to see how things have changed over the past 500 years. Now, there were Jewish refugees from Spain that had more opportunities in the Ottoman Empire. They had been forced out of Spain, especially during the Reconquista, when the Spaniards are retaking their part of the Iberian Peninsula from the Muslims. So, and they kicked out the Jews as well. And so many of them found a lot more opportunities in the Ottoman Empire than what they had found in Europe. Of course, the Devshirme was still in effect. This is when Christians, especially the Balkan communities, had to pay a tribute of boys to the Sultan. And the Devshirme, that's the tribute of those young boys. Those are the ones that became the Janissaries that we've talked about and learned about in the past. An elite group of Christian boys that became warriors as they converted to Islam. And they were essential because they were the ones that could physically, not politically, but physically remove a ruler from power and input a new one. Of course, it was all at the command of another person or group. However, they were the ones that physically brought about that change in power. So they were very important. Like I said, they were forced to convert to Islam and trained. And this was actually, for those Christian boys, it was a means of upward social mobility for them within a Muslim empire. Okay, eventually the Ottoman state was threatened by Christendom. Some Europeans admired Ottoman rule, like philosopher Jean Bodin. In the 16th century, the 1500s, he praised Ottoman religious tolerance. So we see religious tolerance in the Muslim Ottoman Empire, and for a time we see it in the Muslim Mughal Empire in India. But the Europeans, with their religious zeal, weren't so accommodating to other religions, especially Judaism. European merchants evaded the papal bans, papal meaning authority of the Pope, on selling firearms to Turks. They completely evaded that. The Pope came out and said, no, you can't sell the firearms to the Turks, the Turks, the Ottoman Empire. But those Europeans, they avoided that and did as they saw fit. And now, here's a nice, complicated look at the Ottoman Empire and their tributary states. We see the core Ottoman region, right, Anatolia, which this is modern-day Turkey, right? You can see the Mediterranean. This up here is Europe, right? Here's Italy right here. Remember, this is Russia. This is Crimea, right? Ukraine. Giving you a good idea. We see under Suleiman, the lawgiver, 1566, in the land that he acquired, massive amounts of expansion and gained territories. Of course, the tributary states, right, those that provided some devshirme to the Ottoman Empire. And Suleiman, this is one, Suleiman the Magnificent, the lawgiver. He was the one that was notorious for hiring Jews and Christians to do some elite work within the Ottoman Empire. Okay, and that is the end of chapter 13. I will see you for the reflections and a discussion of the visual sources.